Hello, I'm Jane Bringolf. I'm from the Centre for Universal Design Australia, and I'm going to be talking about ageing and mobility, that is, getting out and about. So the key elements I've found are footpaths, seating, lighting, wayfinding and toilets, and particularly in rural areas, parking is an issue. Now, I came to these elements because of the work that I did with Council on the Ageing, where I talked with a lot of older people around New South Wales, along with local government people as well in workshop processes. And these were the 5 and 6 things that bubbled up for older people in terms of getting out and about. So let's start with footpaths. Now, if we only did one thing, older people would be very happy with footpaths, I think. So the clear issue obviously is where there is no footpath, and walking on the grass is a bit of a fear factor for older people. If they don't have good balance, they're terrified of falling over, and that's why they see trip hazards just about everywhere. Even when they're not there, I found that even with brick paving that was totally level, they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to see if a brick lifted and caused a trip hazard. The other thing, as this picture shows, is that too many of our footpaths are too narrow, and I know that there's a conflict with climate people wanting to minimise footpaths and concrete in our environment, but we've got to come up with a solution here. As you can see, not only are they too narrow for 2 people with wheeled devices to pass each other, but they're also too narrow for people to walk side by side for, those social aspects of walking. I have a footpath on one side of my road and not on the other, on my street where I live. And I often see, families or just 2 people walking together, and they walk down the roadway. They don't use the footpath. One of the other issues is a steep crossfall, and that's where you get the wobbly shopping trolley issue of not being able to control the wheels and where the thing goes. And the other issue with the steep crossfalls is that people with hip and knee problems end up with sort of walking with one foot higher than the other, and this causes them pain, and it's also not a good thing for balance either. And look, I know this sounds ridiculous, but curb cuts do come in pairs. I still see quite often, not quite often, but from time to time, a curb cut on one side of the road and not on the other. And the angle of the curb cut needs to allow for someone to be able to get onto the roadway and not get caught in the gutter, as is sometimes the case. I don't know whether older people are harassed at road crossings, being too slow, drivers tooting them or something, but I think anyone involved in transport or traffic has heard the complaints of older people that they're just not given enough time to cross the street. So wider streets, obviously, the pedestrian refuge would be a good idea wherever it's possible. Seating serves 2 purposes. The obvious one is having a place to rest, but also a place to sit and watch the world go by, and perhaps other people will come and join the seat, and conversations might start up. In country areas, this was found to be really important. So having seats in pairs, not necessarily all facing the same way, but perhaps angled where a conversation might strike up, is an important part of encouraging people to get out and about for that social interaction. So placement becomes very important. Set back from the footpath, as you can see in the seats there with the 2 people there sitting under the umbrella, is they have a seat with a backrest and an armrest, which is essential for them. Armrests are what older people use to push up from, or not even just older people, but people with hip and knee problems or back problems need that armrest to push up from. And while shade under a tree is very nice, not if the birds congregate in it. As you can see on the second picture there, that bird droppings have made that seat impossible to sit on. Lighting. We need lighting not just for safety, which is usually where it's mentioned, but just to see things. Like, can you read the bus timetable in the bus shelter on a dull day or even at night? So it's more than just safety. The issues there are no glare, luminance contrast, and an even spread. Now, the picture on the bottom right there is not a black and white picture, it's actually a colour picture where everything is the same shade of grey. At the bottom of the picture are some steps. Those steps do not have contrast nosings, and as you can see in the photo, it all looks like one level area. And for someone with vision perception problems, that is a hazard. In fact, taking photos for a 2D view is a very good way of getting an idea of how people with perception problems see the environment. And that's the same for the third picture there on the left with the pools of light. Now, people with dementia do have perception difficulties. Not everyone with dementia, but this is one of the things where the brain starts to play optical illusions. And as you can see there, if you blink quickly, you can see that that starts to look like steps. And again, someone with dementia who may be also not very steady on their feet will be will have no confidence in walking along that walkway. So signs you can see. The top picture there, obviously the architect didn't want the signage to stand out from his or her wonderful marble design, but it's not very helpful for people, as you can see. So wayfinding is actually more than signage, as most people know, particularly landscape architects. They will try to create legibility of the environment, that is, automatically and intuitively knowing where to go, which direction to go in. I don't think we use landmarks enough, and we don't use colour enough. I complain about this in Sydney because it has a colour palette of 50 shades of grey, and it's not very helpful for getting out and about for older people or anybody who, like me, finds wayfinding and directions and spatial intuition very, very difficult. Street maps are handy, but when I see the sign of "You are here," I still don't know whether I'm facing the same way as the map or whether what I need to go to is actually behind me. Access maps are very handy, and a lot of city councils or local government people do have access maps. Sometimes those maps are not also accessible maps, so that they're not necessarily the same thing. A map for some people who are blind need to be accessible, which won't be the same thing as an access map. So that's the thing about wayfinding. Now, toilets. The top right-hand picture here brings together two other elements I've just spoken about, wayfinding and lighting. When I took this picture, I took it after I'd been directed to the toilet, and only if you have got good eyesight can you see the sign coming down from the ceiling. It's a grey stainless steel sign with dark grey writing on it. I missed it completely because of the glare coming in through the window, and because the sign was, the placement of it was too high for me. It wasn't where I was looking, and the colours aren't standing out for me. So that's two things there. So placement of the signs for the toilet as well as the placement of the toilets. Older people plan their outings by where the toilets are. Bladder conditions are still a taboo thing to talk about, even with the doctor. Obviously, we need access not just for the accessible toilet, but for the whole toilet area. And issues of hygiene are there for a lot of people. And the bottom picture there is actually of a toilet block. It's taken at Rockdale on the bay, at the bay there. And when I approached this building, I had no idea what it was until I walked in the door. And I did subsequently find a sign on the other side of the building, but clearly there's some access expected from this direction, and just note the bollards as to whether they are really helpful there in where they're actually placed. So parking, the car is a mobility device. Before people end up on a mobility scooter, the car is the device of choice. Now, whether it's their own car or whether they're getting someone else to drive them, that's where they feel safe. So no footpath, people drive the car. So that's kind of contradictory to trying to get people out of their car, but I think we have to be realistic here and know that as people get older, the car becomes more important. So that being the case, might like to think about the number of accessible parking spots in car parks, whether there's going to be enough of them. And in rural areas, parking adjacent to really important places like libraries and the pharmacy, that became an issue for a lot of people. Even if they don't have a mobility parking permit, they still want to park fairly close, particularly in the very hot weather. Being out in the sun, having to park in a car park a long way away, and then making that trek to the pharmacy. That was one particular story that I heard. So directions to parking too, so signage is also part of that. So there are just a couple of other things for people with reduced mobility, people who are just not feeling steady on their feet. The top picture there shows a bike rack. There's a conflict there with the cafe seating, and now the footpath is too narrow for anyone with wheels to get past it. The right hand side there, we still have people who think it's okay, even though it's illegal, to park over the footpath and let their shrubbery overhang the footpath as well. So where there's likely to be overhanging shrubbery, maybe there's a case for thinking about the placement of the footpath before it goes down. And the last picture there on the left is a woman in a wheelchair struggling past a parked bicycle on a narrow footpath, which isn't very helpful for her either. I just need to say a quick something about universal design, obviously. I'm from the Centre for Universal Design. I just want to say that we have moved on from the 7 principles of universal design in the 1990s, and we are now at co-design. Older people will be able to tell you what works for them. So we've moved from trying to just educate designers saying it's their job to get it right, to saying, how about we just find out what's important for the community? And through the workshops that I ran, I found that older people not only came up with the issues, but they also came up with the solutions as well. And in working together with local government, they could understand what could and couldn't be done, and compromises, and also the important, if you've only got a budget for 10 seats, where is the best place to put the 10 seats? If you've only got a budget for a certain amount of footpath, where is it most important to put it? Where is the maintenance going to have the biggest impact? And the people will be able to tell you. So in summary, it's the details that matter. Footpaths, seating, lighting, wayfinding and toilets. Older people know what works for them, ask them, they have the solutions, and co-design is a learning experience for everyone. So just embrace it. And just 4 resources here, key ones. The top one is a checklist that I put together, very simple, just in a Word document, some do's and don'ts of some very basic things that you can think about for those 5 principles, and some wayfinding and some things about dementia which I haven't had time to cover. So here is our contact details. If you want to contact us, the website has a huge amount of information on it. It is like a repository for information, research, practical guidelines and so on. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to interacting with you later on.